Last week on Mosaic Minds,
as I started going through this process of taking my theater background, my language background, my short-term rental background, I was like, I wonder if I could help more people by sharing how to relate stories. And as I've been doing that, it starts to show that when you are like a podcast host, Nick and Jason, you'll definitely attest to this, the more progress that you can recognize and the more stories that are successful ways of doing things that you can see, the easier it is for you to turn decades into days. And those stories often boil down into a principle, and those principles will start to make it so that you can help your audience soar.
welcome to Mosaic Minds, the podcast where every episode is a colorful blend of perspectives, ideas, and conversation. Each week, our diverse team of hosts brings their unique backgrounds, experiences, and interests to the table. Mosaic Minds is your invitation to join the conversation to see the world through a kaleidoscope of viewpoints. So grab a seat, tune in, and let the mosaic unfold before you. With your storytelling background, how important is psychology behind all of that, and how much of a part does that play in the whole process?
Well, the psychology of storytelling. This might be a little longer answer, but
it's okay.
Let's start with this. There was a study done years ago where these people came and they said, all right, we want to figure out how we can get some slow down traffic signs that are kind of big into people's yards and have them be okay with us putting them there. So they kind of did this split study, and they said, well, would you be willing to put this little card in your window? It's basically like, hey, slow down, don't drive fast. Most of the people that they knocked on the window and they said, hey, will you take this tiny little card and put it in your window? They said, yeah, that's a small little commitment. I'm fine with that. And then a few weeks later, they came back and they said, hey, can we put this big sign that's basically said the same thing in your lawn? Can we do that? Is that fine? And because they had that commitment earlier, that was a yes, they said, yeah, you can do that.
At the bridge.
They did the same thing starting with the big sign in another neighborhood, and almost everybody said, no, I don't want that big sign in my yard. And it starts with that permission. If you have a small win, it is a way that you can start to build rapport. Let's talk about how that applies to storytelling. If you are able to get a hook or a framework that people are bought into, as soon as they say, oh, I'm interested in this story, that small little hook, that lean in, that gives you permission to go and expand on the backstory. It gives you permission to go and expound the conflict and the difficulty of what's going on with those characters. But if you don't have them in the first minute or two hooked with that inciting incident and say, oh, wow, this is a really big problem, you will want to stay to the very end because it hopefully will be solved, but if not, the whole world's going to come to a stop or whatever. The higher those stakes are, the bigger it is for those people to psychologically have to see it. Here's a way that you'll see this on social media with their storytelling. They will give you a 1 to 3 second hook and say, hey, stay to the end to make sure that you know what happens to this. And then they'll start at the beginning of the story. Anytime you have a forward, this is getting to that higher level thing, but it's basically you will have something pop up at the beginning of a story that at the end of the story will have to come back. For instance, in Harry Potter, you guys familiar with Harry Potter? Hopefully this is an okay reference. In Harry Potter, you have the golden snitch, the golden snitch. It gets caught in Harry's mouth, right? And later on, this is going to be spoiler alert if you've never seen this, but it says, I open at the close. And they're like, what the heck? He gets this given back to him later on, like literally books later, he gets the golden stitch back from Dumbledore. And it has an incantation that if he touches it, it's supposed to open. And the Minister of Magic's there waiting for it to open, and it doesn't open. He's like, what the heck? Why didn't that work? Whatever. And he leaves. And then Harry plops it and gives it a kiss, and it opens up later on in the story, because it wasn't his hand that caught it was his mouth. He caught the stitch with his mouth. Those little anchoring ideas that come and get payoff later, those closed loops, that's one of the ways that you hook an audience in and make them appreciate the entire arc of a story. This is something that happens in almost all good storytelling. You will have a lot of dominoes get set up early on in the show, and then later on, something will push that domino, and because you saw them all get set up, you'll know, oh, this fell, so now this is going to fall, and now that's going to fall, and bam, this is what happens. So the psychology of this, if you understand where you want to go in a story and you craft the story in such a way that you let the audience in on the secret, you let them know what to expect, you help them see that domino get set up, when it gets pushed by somebody, they get to enjoy the entire process. Here's a concrete example. If you've ever seen Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin, he sets up all of these little traps for the burglars that are going to try and come and steal stuff from him. They have like nails in the floor, glue, and they have tons of broken ornaments and like a bowling ball at the top of the stairs, and all of these different things that you're like, oh, I can't wait till those guys get in there because I want to see every single one of these booby traps come to fruition.
Yeah.
Every time you set that trap, you are creating anticipation for your audience, and the chances of them leaving when you build that anticipation, that psychology is so important. If there's no anticipation, if they don't care what happens, they might as well leave the theater and not pay attention. They might as well not interact with your advertisement or your marketing. But if you can help them build that anticipation and be like, oh, what is going to happen? And they get on the end of their seat and they lean in, like, oh, I have to see this. And then you go to commercial break, you're like, oh, I need to see that. One of the other things with psychology is I'm sure you've heard of the term a cliffhanger, right? We're not talking about a booger. We're talking about like at the end of a story. Anytime you cut that action off before it's completely finished, you build anticipation. You'll notice this with a lot of television series. They'll leave it open-ended. Yeah. They'll leave it with just enough, I wonder, that your audience wants to come back and see what happens next. If you don't have a what's happens next and it's all completely tied up, there's no extra story, and they're going to just go on with their life. But if you build enough anticipation and you tie one story to the next story, suddenly they are invested in the characters, they're invested in you, they're invested in your business, and all of those things come to fruition when you have that last domino fall. And when that falls and they knew it was set up, it feels good. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just real quick, the theme of the Mosaic kind of merges stuff together. So just to throw this out there, I'm going to merge sport, real estate, storytelling with you. I'm going to throw you a little bit of fork in the road, but you're going to handle it. Talk to us a little bit about how you sharpen your skills at the Toastmasters, because I know your storytelling there, your public speaking there. Talk to the general audience and do this. Tell a vibrant story so Nick and I are convinced to go to our local meeting just to kind of
we've been talking about
break that ice. You know, I don't want to say pitch us, but give us a story of how that's inspired you and increased your craft, because I can tell you take pride in your craft and you're always wanting to get better. You're not a stagnant person.
Yes, so this brings up one of my favorite quotes in Chinese, 不进则退. If you're not progressing, you're digressing. Just like in theater, your last show is the one that people remember. In storytelling, the last story that you told, that's the one that people remember. One of the reasons I like Toastmasters, and I like a lot of different types of personal development. Toastmasters is just one, so it's not something that is exclusive. There are lots of ways you can do it, but I personally choose Toastmasters because they have a very simple program and it's tailored to what you want to do. They have some specific skills, and then you take those skills and apply it to your story. It's not, you have to talk about this specific element only. No, you come up with your stories, your topics, and they say, here's a few different ways you can fill it out and use this to polish your story. So here's one that I'm going to be delivering tomorrow. I'll give you a little 3-minute version of it. And I'm really excited about it. So This was one of those moments a few years ago that I had my eyes opened. And it was honestly only probably 30 seconds of my life, but it has influenced the way that I look at life. You guys bought in? You excited to hear this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get it.
Last year, during the slow season of my short-term rentals, I was just really frustrated. I was like, where am I going to go to make the last couple $1,000 I need to make sure I hit all of my rents, make sure I have all my bills paid? What do I need to do? And I went and I talked to my mom, and she's like, well, you could come and do some odd jobs for us. I was like, all right, I'm going to do some odd jobs. She's like, well, come paint the bathroom. I was like, no problem. I can paint the bathroom. I do these random odd jobs. And painting the bathroom, getting all these strokes in there, making it look beautiful. And then I'd go do another one. I'd mow their lawn, and just all these random things. While I was doing all these things, there was one day that I was at my parents' house. I walk out to the shed, which had all of our tools in it, the paint supplies, and I noticed the door was just slightly cracked open. I was like, huh, that's weird. I open the door, I walk in, and I hear this like this weird buzzing sound. I was like, what the heck? Where is that? And I look up, and I'm like, is this a June bug? What is that? There was this thing that was bouncing really quickly off the ceiling. And after I looked at it for a second, I noticed it was a little hummingbird. It's a little hummingbird just bouncing its head off the ceiling. It could not figure out how to get out of the shed. And I was like, well, I'm going to try and catch this thing and get him out of here. So I opened the door really wide, and I was like, come get out. And I was like gesturing, trying to make him go out there. And he could not, for the life of him, figure out how to get out of the shed. I was taken aback how easy it was for him to get in, but how hard it was for him to get out. It's almost like one of those little wasp traps. They get in there, and then even though the way they came in is right there, they can't figure out how to get out. So I tried to swat at him with a broom to get him out, and he was too frantic to go out. So I got on these little gloves. I had these garden gloves, the rubber ones. So just in case, he didn't poke me and make me bleed or something. But I was tall enough, I was able to kind of press him softly against the ceiling and cup him into my hands. And when I looked at him, his head, he'd been bouncing off long enough. I don't know if he'd been in there a few hours or he'd been in there a whole day, but his head, like the feathers looked kind of flattened. And in the 80s how they had those flat top hairdos? Yeah, he had like a flat top as a hummingbird. And I was looking at him, and he was so exhausted. So exhausted. And I went outside and I opened my hand, and he didn't immediately fly away. It was almost like he turned to me and he said, thank you so much. I'm so glad I was in your hands. He trusted me enough to take him out. And he's like, you could have killed me, but you didn't. Thank you. And he flew off. And I was like, wow, that was a cool experience. I saved a little baby bird that was bouncing off. And then it struck me. Whose hands are we willing to go in when we're stuck, when we're hitting that glass ceiling in our business, in life, when we're trying to progress and we can't see the way out? Whose hands are we entrusted, and who are we willing to trust enough that we will put our full faith, our whole self into their hands so that we can be saved? And I was like, wow.
Yeah, that's profound. I like it.
That was 30 seconds of my life, but it drastically changed the way that I saw challenges, drastically changed the way that I saw how you can deal with being stuck. It's not a matter of how do I get out, because it wasn't apparent to that little bird. He couldn't see it. It's who do I need to trust enough to put myself in their hands.
Right, to show me the way out. Yeah.
Show me the way
I
out.
think like I used to collect baseball cards, and when the rookie year it'd say future stars, we're talking to a future star. I'm not saying you're not already there, but you're on a meteoric rising, right? Because you're connecting with people, you're interviewing people from different backgrounds. The thing that's so cool about it is I believe that you could interview someone high end or someone that's not even really has a social media presence or anything in between, and it's just kind of a, you could go like this, but you're eventually going to come into the center, connect with that person, better that person, they leave edified of that communication and things. What is it about storytelling for you that separates it from just a casual conversation leading into other questions? How does the storytelling aspect, and I'm going to compliment Nick, I think this was a great topic because I was just telling him about being animated and using tone today away from this, and then you're bringing it full circle for us. So I know that was a loaded question, but kind of take it in any direction you want to take it.
One of the things that comes apparent to me is when you are engaged in storytelling and you are connecting with someone, you're able to tap into their passion and into the things that make them feel important. Because everyone has this desire to feel important. Everyone wants to be noticed, to be heard, to be seen, to be understood. And when you share amazing stories, that's cultural capital. And I say that specifically because if you look in any culture, there are some legends that live on. There are these characters, these heroes that people gravitate to and they want to emulate and model their life after. Who you model your life after really matters. And the stories that you choose to share with your kids, with your family, and the ones that you choose to write down, those may be the only things that live on in your legacy 50, 100 years down the road. So the stories that you share and you took the time to really think out, what are the ways that you want to articulate who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, and then highlight those and do this in a way that is instructive but not dogmatic. You're not forcing your ideas on somebody else. You're giving them the experience to go through and relive that moment with you without having to force it on them. Is it okay if I share another quick story that just came to mind? This is one
go ahead. Absolutely. Fire away, man.
That just came to me. This is from 2 years ago. I went to a little pond. It's Black Ridge Reservoir. If you've ever been to South Jordan, Utah, it's a beautiful little reservoir, kind of little beachfront. And my kids and I, we loved going here. In the summer, it's so much fun. And it's kind of secluded. There's some nice sandy beach style reservoir stuff there. And when we came up, there was these families that were kind of arguing on the beach. They're like, "Oh, don't go over to that side of the pond. It's really gross. There's something dead on that side of the pond. It's gross." So we noticed almost everybody had moved and migrated to the north side of the shore. And I was like, that's so weird. What are they doing that for? So let my kids get ready, and I went and investigated because I'm not just going to let that be. And I noticed there was this little dead duckling, this tiny little duckling that was dead, and it had some kelpy seaweed stuff tied around it, and it looked pretty gross because it's probably been dead a few days. It smelled a little bit, and I was like, "This is it. This is what you guys are complaining about, and why there's like 50 yards on both sides of us that nobody's here."
Right.
So I just went over to the trash can right in front of the pavilion. I fished out a little piece of, I think it was a cup, basically. I fished out a little cup, and I went and I scooped it up, and I threw the little duckling away. And then it was amazing. Those little bickering people that were to the side, they slowly, gradually came, and they joined us, and they filled out the whole beach. And they complained about it. It sounded like they'd been complaining about it most of the day, but how long did it actually take to solve the problem? Moments.
Yeah.
And it was one of those times when I was grateful that I was a doer rather than just someone that was talking about doing. There's so many times in life when the problem that we're talking about could be solved if we just spent the time to figure out what's the logistics to solve it, rather than, man, let's complain about this part of the problem and this part of the problem. Really, we have the ability to solve so many things if we just get into action and get going. So that's a story that was huge. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that you've kind of caused me to think about tonight is when storytelling, it is a form of almost hypnosis. You know, there's almost put you in a little bit of a trance, you know, once you can put yourself in that place. And also I heard you mention a few words like hook, anchor, and frame, and it makes me wonder, like, do you have also some kind of study or background in neuro-linguistic programming?
Yes, I do. Thank you for noticing that. That's something that's really important to me, because when you are playing with language, it is so important to make sure that it is, one, understood, And then when you're setting anchors for people, right? If you are doing a story, that's one way to set an anchor. That's not the only way to set an anchor. Sometimes you have to have a dramatic experience or dramatic demonstration. But having an experience that gives them a reason to remember and to go back to that moment. What did it feel like? What did it taste like? What did it smell like? The more emotions and senses you can bring into a story, the easier it is for your audience to be transported and to have that suggestibility of, man, what if this happened to you? So one of my favorite quotes, this is actually from my grandpa, Leonard Parkin. He's a professional artist. He said, "The imagination is a place." So I compiled a book with my wife about his artwork and his life. It took us 5 years to compile and find all of his artwork that we could. And we put it into this beautiful book that was a blurb book. And one of the things that I noticed that he did was he always went to this place of imagination. And if we're talking about neurolinguistic programming, we talk about anything with language patterns, there is some suggestibility when you are willing to help them go into that imagination. Because when you say the word imagine, you're giving people the opportunity to think what that means to them. If you force ideas on somebody, it's kind of like telling a bad story or a bad joke. It wasn't surprising, it wasn't funny, and it shuts people down. But if you give them the opportunity to connect with you and to go along with that story, eventually they're going to be able to recall that story and relate that story to somebody else. That's one of the ways you can know that you told a great story, is somebody else that heard it can relate that story to somebody that they know as well, because it made an impact. If it's not recallable, it's not duplicatable, it's probably not as effective of a story. You look at like brand stories in any type of marketing. If you don't recognize the brand, they're not top of mind, their storytelling isn't very on par. It may not be very funny or evocative. It's not helping you understand what they actually do to solve your problem. And if they are highly forgettable, the chances of you interacting with that brand long term is pretty slow, and it's not going to happen quickly. But if they are top of mind, and when you are hungry, for instance, you're like, oh, I think of Chick-fil-A. You're like, why is that? Their brand has a very clear voice, and they tell a story, and they have all these different elements. So like the cow in Chick-fil-A, we'll use them as an example. They have this misspelled word on there, eat mo chicken. And there's a little bit of a dynamic story that's being told there. These cows don't want to become burgers anymore. And it's their desperate cry to make us eat chickens and to deflect all of the attention onto the chickens. There's a story behind that. And because there's a story and it makes you kind of chuckle, suddenly you are brought into a good feeling with them. And we talk about that catharsis. That's one of the ways that you can do that in your storytelling, in your advertising, in your marketing, in your copyright, is how do you make your audience feel? If they don't feel it, they don't see it, they don't hear it, they're going to just forget you. And that kind of sucks if you're paying to put some advertisement out there. You want them to remember you.
So your hummingbird experience inspired me, so I'm going to give you a small story, and then we'll get back on topic. But I'm 14 years old. I don't have sandals on. There's sand underneath my feet. Mm-hmm. I stand up on a disheveled pier. I'm in the Bahamas. And I'm used to a basketball player, a football player, a superstar, right? Mm-hmm. And 3 or 4 kids run out on the dock behind me, and they point to this guy in a boat that looked like third world country boat, would be the easiest way to put it. And the guy was pulling these very earth-toned conch shells fresh out of the ocean and was serving them up with onions and some other spices and things and giving the salad. So the point I'm making of this story is like, I'm not a storyteller, right? So I wasn't overly detailed with that, but I can remember that, and that came full circle for me as I'm listening to you, because to me, those children that were enamored by the presence of this guy pulling a fresh shell out of the ocean was equivalent to a guy making a jump shot in front of 20,000 people and the whole crowd like rushing for the buzzer beater. So I think I'm just sharing that with you, not to impress you, just to say that was interesting how a 30-second snippet of your life made an event in my life that I hadn't thought that I would ever think about 30 years ago come full circle to me and see that and just be amazed by this guy was kind of the superstar for the moment. Like they're talking to this guy and asking questions because that was the second and the third generation that would want to do the same thing he was to be the celebrity. And the sad thing that I'm going to say about it is the celebrity was the survivor, was the guy that had food, that probably provided a little additional resource. So I can really appreciate the missionary work you did, because that's a mission as well, to keep the the children fed that would normally get fed. So I know that's interesting, but we're telling some stories, and that just meant a lot to me to be able to tell that story in a real reference, full time to kind of to relive that moment.
Actually, Jason, I'm going to disagree with you, because I was going to say earlier, Jason is an incredible storyteller, and I don't even think he realizes it. He's very detailed in his stories, and I always, like, as he's telling me a story, even if it's one that would kind of be outside of what normally I'd be interested in, like he somehow he sucks me in because he's so detailed, and I can I can picture myself there, so I think he's just naturally, without even realizing it, a good storyteller on that kind of stuff.
I think
I'm going to actually get in there too, Jason, for a second, because
everyone
has the ability to develop their skill set in storytelling. However it is that you want to share it, because none of us are born storytellers. All of us learn language, and we learn specific words, and those words have meaning. Every word that you choose, that word selection, tells a story of who you are, your background, and the words that you choose to put into that story, that kind of creates a visual for your audience. It lets us see what it is that you see, and you're doing your best to take those images from your head and those experiences and transfer them. So I agree with Nick that sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. We absolutely can become better and better and better storytellers, and I think you already are a great storyteller. So sorry, 2 against 1.
I think
you're a good storyteller.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron. I think it's just great to hear that and continue and to be encouraged, because honestly, lighthearted episode, right? We're excited. You're getting to strive in the areas that you are. We're developing that. I think, to me, it's just the change in the angle of the diaphragm. I'm even doing it now. I'm more animated. I'm more engaged. Well, 15 minutes ago, I was very engaged, but I'm more listening. Now that I'm picking up on it, it makes a huge difference to be animated for me, because when I'm not animated, I think I'm monotone. I think I'm X. So I'm trying to sharpen iron, sharpens iron through hearing you, being inspired by it. So I think that's an excellent thing.
Yeah. Wonderful. I mean, like I said, I'm always like sucked in whenever at work or here, whatever. Like when you're telling your stories. Well, to like kind of leave our audience with an idea of how, like a how to, like what are some good, other than doing it, right? Because that's going to be probably the best way is to get better at it. It would just be to do it over and over again. But as far as something that somebody could practice at home without speaking to a group of people or even a couple people, what are maybe some skills that they could implement to help them? Because I get tongue tied even in the intro. Sometimes I get tongue tied, and it's not even like a nerves thing or anything like that. It's just sometimes it just happens. Maybe my mind drifts off for a second. About something that I just said or whatever. So what are some good ways that people could practice at home or like in a small group, learning some of these techniques?
Excellent. I would say one of the main things you want to do is to get around people that are interested in hearing your story. So one of the ways I've done this is I do something called a mind storm. It's not just a brainstorm, because I like to surround myself with other people that are interested in the story. So let's say you've got 5 or 6 friends. You're around a table, and you've been thinking about this story for a little while. You say, hey guys, can I share a story with you? And they're like, yeah, let's hear it. If you have an interested audience, the chances of you telling a good story go up exponentially. And when a story is falling on ears that are wanting to hear it, suddenly you're going to remember details that you may not have if you were trying to just sit in your room and write it. One of the ways you can also interact with this is something that I've done because I've been going through, I'm writing a course right now about storytelling, and I'm using it from the perspective of me going super deep on my own story. When you can recognize what are the significant moments in your life, and then document it as best you can. What are the pictures that remind you of that experience? What are the environmental elements that you can bring back into it? Maybe you have to physically walk through that park that you saw the dock on, and you have to interact with the water and the sand. Whatever you need to do to bring those memories back, the more associations you create, the easier it is to make that story full. So that's S. Is it significant? You dive in, you can go through your journal, your photos, maybe it's even music you would have listened to at that time. What are things that will bring back those memories? The T in storytelling would be, is it something that you can translate to an audience and find some lesson? Is there some meaning behind it? If there's not a point to your story, it's just kind of empty words. When you have something that you learned from it that was impactful to you, and there's a reason to share the story, that's when that significant moment to you becomes significant to somebody else. This is part of my story framework, ST. The O is there an objective? Something that you are going after, something that you are passionate about. And if you can really figure out in this story, what is the main character trying to do? What is the super objective if you're getting into like a narrative that's a long novel? Because that can transpire over many, many pages. If it's simple, what is the objective? What are the thing that they really want more than anything? And as they fight for that thing, and there's challenges and there's difficulties and all these different obstacles, if they have a clear objective going after it, it's interesting for your audience because there's ups and there's downs, there's twists, there's turns, there's interest. But if there's no conflict and there's no objective, you're not telling anything but a description, and you might as well just be looking at a menu in a restaurant, because that's not what the point of it is. The R is relatability. This is going even farther in connecting with your story. When you can make this relate back to your audience, give them that opportunity to see behind the curtain and know, oh, that's the Wizard of Oz back there. I know what he's doing there. You can hear it. You can see it. You give them the opportunity to see those dominoes get set up, even though all the characters except for one in there don't know. As soon as the domino falls, you get to have the audience have that reaction like, oh, here comes that ball from the top of the stairs. It's going to hit him. Oh, it hit that guy right in the face. Oh, he stepped on the little orbs or whatever, the little glass ornaments. Man, he got the iron on the face. I can't believe it. Oh, got a BB gun. Shoot, that's so bad. You got all of those things that come full circle. And then the Y is yes, it has to have a call to action that someone agrees with. When you tell a story, you give them a reason to say yes to that story. I want to do something because of whatever it is that you heard. A lot of times a good story, if you are doing it in business, if you don't have a call to action, it's like telling somebody to repent without actually giving them a commitment, a clear line of action that they can get the benefit. If you go through this whole sales presentation and you don't ask for the order, you wasted an hour. If you go and you have an advertisement and they don't have a way that they can find you and buy your product, you shared a story. Maybe they were transported, they felt it, they were there, but it fell flat. That is the power of this story framework. So I came up with this framework a couple months ago, but it has been so instructive for me to think back, is this significant? Is it something that I can translate to my audience to make sure that they've codified this and it's meaningful? Is it organized in a way that there's an objective and it's clear that the conflicts that I'm going for, that I know what I want to go after? And then is it relatable, and is there a call to action that people, yes, they agree to? That's that story framework, and that's what I want to leave with you guys, because I think this is one of the reasons why I'm writing this book that I am right now, is because this framework can help so many people that even if they think they're not a good storyteller, you can increase the value of your story by just hitting all 5 of those elements. So there you go.
That's great.
So I'm a person listening to this for the first time, maybe Mosaic Minds, and hearing you for the first time. What type of time frame do you feel like that I could purchase or network with you to look at that book, like from a networking standpoint, or a purchase of the
Yeah, do you have a launch date on it?
I don't have a launch date on it yet, but definitely follow my podcast. You will get all those updates when it is ready. I will definitely say it on the podcast. I'm working with a guy. His name's David. Let me see his last name. David Lois Strauss. So I'm working with this guy to frame how I want to put my story together. And as I'm creating, it's technically going to be 2 books in this series, but it's all about storytelling and how it applies to business. Kind of like what our conversation was today. We're going to be hitting some of the psychological elements, some of the different ways that you can apply that framework and then improve the way that you do your copyright in advertisements on your website, different ways that you have your customer actually go through and become the hero of their story. There's so many different ways that as you improve your storytelling and your ability to tell stories, that you can create relationships. Because business is all about relationships. And if you don't have great relationships, you're networking, but it's not working.
Exactly.
So you definitely
it's work.
want to
it's not
build
networking. So
Exactly,
I'm going to leave you with this. What you've taught me tonight is that conversations are miniature stories.
Absolutely.
Stories are a separate category. So I learned a long time ago, if you look at a triangle, listen, acknowledge, explore. Constantly be navigating the 3-point intersection with listen, acknowledge, explore. Go in that triangle several times before you respond. That way it's not a ping pong match to where I'm just responding, you're asking, responding, asking. I think if you analyze what you're saying, you expand upon that, you're more detail-oriented with your stories, I think that hits totally different than just the ping pong match that I just described. And you really made an impression on me in a very positive way in that. So I'm going to give you a virtual fist bump for that, because I think that's some good stuff, man. I was inspired throughout our conversation. It was edifying. It was laid back and casual, but it was a master's level course in communication and storytelling.
Definitely,
I really appreciate that.
A lot of value for sure. Where all can our audience find you and your books and your podcast and all that?
Yeah, as of right now, you can look up the Levelin Up Podcast with Brigham Blackham. And I've guested on a lot of different podcasts. You'll see on YouTube, on Facebook, all these different places. But if you are looking up BrighamB.com, that's still under wraps right now. It'll probably be coming out in the next month or so. That's going to be my speaking website. So Brigham, BRIGHAM, is in Blackham.com. Still working that. So M. Curtis McCoy, my good buddy who's been on there, he's going to help me finalize getting everything together. But that's cool. Where I'm going to be putting a place where you can buy the books, a place where you can go and connect with me on a continual basis. But right now, just find that podcast. I'll make sure in the show notes that you guys have a link to my link tree as well. So
okay,
awesome.
Perfect. Yeah, you with your podcast. How do you? I'm just curious. This is kind of just for personal, but like, how do you go about? Do you use the matchmaker thing a lot, or how do you go about getting a lot of your guests, or do you just reach out to people that you want to talk to?
So I haven't used matchmaker. Curtis did say that'd be a good suggestion. I have a few different speaker groups that I'm part of. My favorite way, though, is to be introduced by another person that was a guest on my podcast.
Yeah.
So if I have someone on my podcast and I say, hey, who else do you know that might be a good fit? They're my favorite introductions. So, for instance, I met Curtis, and then he introduced me to Tawny Lee. And then because of that, I went and did a little speaking engagement with them at the Healing Conference. I was like, every time that you meet somebody, it's an opportunity to get connected to the next person. So another way that I've done that is when I attend a conference, I'm thinking, who's that one person, that linchpin person that will make all the difference in my business? And I don't, if I go to a conference and I only meet one person and it is a connection that's really impactful, it was absolutely worth it. Because now my life's actually different. There's a trajectory difference. So for instance, a few months ago, I met a guy named Chris who was at our Infinity Summit, and I was like, man, this guy is awesome. He does Operation Black Site. He works with Dan Fleischman, who's done like the Aspire tours and some of the biggest masterminds in the country. And I was like, I need to have this guy on my podcast. So I strategically got as close to him as I could at like dinner and chatted with him, and he agreed to come on the podcast. I was like, that was awesome. We made it a really good connection, and now his wife and I are really good friends, and he's really good friends with me. And it's just one of those things that anytime you're at an event, anytime you're around like-minded individuals, actually ask the question. You never know if they're going to be open to being on a podcast. So let's see, 2 days ago, no, what was Saturday? 3 days ago? 4 days ago. Saturday, I was over at a event in Denver, and there was this amazing guy that I met. He's a musician. He's an entrepreneur. and his name's Nate. And when I was talking with him at dinner, I was like, you know what? I know you're writing a book right now and you've got an album coming out. When your album's done, would you be open to coming on the podcast? He's like, man, that would be awesome. I'd love to do that. And it was just because I asked a question. I made a connection, and then I asked the question, do you want to be on the podcast? If you don't make the connection first, it's a little harder. Because I've had those times where I do like the blanket, hey, I'd like to have this guy on my podcast, and you just get crickets in return. Yeah. But when you have a connection first, makes it way easier. So for instance, with this podcast, I met Curtis, and then I found out about what you guys do. I was like, I'm going to see if that would be of value to have me on the podcast, and we can collaborate. And that's how it goes. You meet somebody and then see who else do they know that I could add value to. How do I serve? And then it just becomes a good connection. So did that answer your question, Nick? Was that enough?
It did. And it even kind of like give me a good follow-up question. So Brigham, who do you know that would be a good guest on our podcast?
Yeah. I actually have probably 2 suggestions. First one would be my friend. His name is Dr. Greg Kimball. So he's part of the Final Percent Network as well. He's my business coach. Okay. Very entertaining. He's a Grammy Award winner, really cool guy. He just wrote 4 books. Really awesome dude. You can get to know him on thefinalpercent.com. That's his website. But he's a phenomenal speaker. He's been my speaker coach and my business coach for a little over a year now. Very entertaining. I've been on his podcast 3 different times. His podcast is the Final Percent podcast. And yeah, he's got a great personality, and he's really easy to interface with. And he's someone that I really enjoy. So that would be one. And then the other one would probably be Eric Counts. He's one of my good friends. He owns a company called Credit Nerds. He used to be a stand-up comedian, but now he's a business professional. So he's very entertaining to chat with, and he's got some funny stories. And I always like to have an opportunity to talk with him. And those would be 2 that I would say definitely go check out.
That's cool. Yeah. I was listening to a little bit of your podcast earlier, and that's kind of how I got on the whole tonality thing. I was like, man, this guy sounds, because this was just you have a video podcast as well, or just the audio?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a video podcast as well. I have them streamed on Facebook right now, so it's really easy to see that.
In my best Mario and Luigi voice, thanks a lot for leveling us up tonight.
Yes.
It's not a problem. No problem. God bless, guys.
You as well, man. Thank you.